Yeah, Twitch. Welcome back, perfect peeps, to perfect.dev. On today's broadcast, we have Joel Vardy from Agility CMS. Welcome, Joel.
Hi, it's great to be here.
As always, my partner in crime, Brittany Postma.
Hello.
Hello, Brittany.
Great to be here.
Joel, is it a little warmer in Toronto? You probably do in Celsius. Is it like 1 at least?
Yeah, it's minus 14 Celsius, which is I think like I don't know. It's cold.
That's
cold
really
enough.
cold.
It's cold.
Yeah,
it's not fun.
It's been a little warmer here in Michigan, so it's been a little nicer. So not to detract this conversation too much about coldness here in Michigan. Little intro on Joel. Joel is the VP. Hang on. I got my info wrong here. He is the CTO and president of Agility CMS. It's a SaaS headless content management platform that combines flexible and fast headless architecture with familiar and easy authoring tools for editors. Joel, you have 20 years of experience in software development. That's incredible.
Wow, I should have said, don't remind me of that on here. Gosh, that's a long time. Feels like a long time. Yeah, and it just keeps on getting longer. Every year, it just keeps on increasing.
I feel like this day and age, if you're in a SaaS product and you have 20 years of experience, you've been doing something right.
Been doing a lot of different things, so that's cool. And you know what? I say to this a lot: the greatest measure of success and the only guarantee of success is don't quit, never give up, and haven't yet.
That's really great advice. That's why I keep telling myself on bad days with Coding Cat, it's like, oh, why do I do this on the side? And then I'm like, no, just don't quit. Just
don't quit. You bet.
So yeah, we're here to talk all about Agility CMS. It's another CMS, but I feel like it has a little bit of a different take to it. So first of all, can we talk a little bit about what a headless CMS actually is?
Yeah, it's great. Great question. It comes up all the time, and I think I've heard a lot of different ways of talking about it. I mean, because it's like, well, what's CMS compared to traditional CMS as headless CMS? Headless CMS is API driven, so it's as opposed to it being in your website, like when you have a WordPress website, it's, when you edit the website, you're in WordPress, it's all one thing. Whereas with Headless CMS, there's a separation there. So your CMS can be over here and you can send content to your website or your app or multiple websites or any your emails for whatever your email templates are, any of those things, any place where your organization needs content, you can send it there.
Very cool. Yeah. And I think something that to keep kind of that mental picture for people when we talk WordPress, like a single instance, and a lot of times we're using WordPress these days and Jamstack as kind of that API layer as well. So the difference here, with your product as well, the interesting part is it's fully hosted, correct?
Yeah. So the CMS itself is a managed service. So it's like when you sign up and you create your instance, that's all taken care of for you, and that's kept in the cloud, and that presents your content. So it gives you an API access point for your content, but also it gives you all your assets. So all your files, your images and whatever, it delivers those over a CDN to you as well. So it kind of gives you two things, but it doesn't host your website for you, which is one of the more confusing things. So if a lot of people come to us to say, well, I want, I can do WordPress. What can I, how do I get a site hosted quickly with Agility? And that's why we have, starter packages and stuff to get you on things like Netlify or Vercel, where you can host completely for free and pretty much do a production website without it costing you anything to get started.
So we were actually we were on the Gatsby conf earlier today, and I saw something come up about Fastly, right? So tell me a little bit. You just mentioned a CDN, and it kind of reminded me. Is that your CDN of choice, and you guys are using for Agility?
Yeah, Fastly is fantastic. It is just such a great platform. So interestingly enough, Gatsby Cloud, they're using for, they just announced their hosting. You can do Gatsby Cloud hosting. It's on top of Fastly. Agility, we just switched our CDN not too long ago over to Fastly for all our images and files and everything, as well as the CDN. And I think the biggest thing is like they have a kind of a different take to CDN as opposed to something like Akamai or Verizon, where they try to have like thousands of little nodes all over the globe. Fastly has fewer nodes, but they're more powerful, which means that the cache clearing is way faster. And we find that like the ability, you change some content or you change a file, and it's instantly there within it's milliseconds. And we find that it's just so great for our customers. They get instant content changes.
That's awesome.
What did you move away from, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So the other service we're using, which I still love as a service, was oh my gosh, it's StackPath.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So StackPath is also amazing. The difference there is that they're not quite as fast for cache clearing. So what they do, but actually it really works well, and they're a lot cheaper. So I would still recommend StackPaths. Like if you don't have as much budget for like bandwidth and CDN and that sort of stuff, it still works. It doesn't have as many kind of bells and whistles, but it's still a pretty great product as well.
So as you're providing kind of that software as a service, the CMS as a service, something kind of came into my mind. We use Cloudinary for media-backed CDN, but we're also able to CNAME that. So we have media.codingcat.dev. Is that an option that you guys provide for your CMS?
Yeah. That's one of the. It comes with one of the pricing packages. I can't remember which level it comes with, but it could be the enterprise package. Which most of the people who come to look to pay for CMS, they're on like a pro level or an enterprise level, and the rest of the folks that come are like developers doing personal sites, or they're just getting going. But stuff like that is it's more of a pro level, enterprise level type feature.
Okay.
That one and single sign-on always is the big one.
Oh, yeah.
Enterprise single sign-on is a huge sort of enterprise type feature.
Auth is always so painful. I feel like it hurts my ears just to talk about it. It's like, oh, do I have to do this again today?
Yeah, well, you talk about using external products. Like we use Fastly, which basically solved all the CDN issues we have. Cloudinary is actually a great product because it just takes care of all like the asset stuff. We use Auth0 for our for all the authentication we do, and it's like, here, just takes care of it. Here, no longer a problem. So it just kind of passes it through.
No SAML, no tokens you got to mess with. I mean, come on, why make it so easy, right?
Yeah, totally.
So there's a lot of CMSs kind of coming out in the Jamstack space. Some probably that have been around for a while. Contentful is one of those that always comes up as one of the leader. I want to say Prismic. Am I getting that right? Yeah, Prismic's the slices, right? And then for one that I'm really familiar with is Sanity.io. So if I were to sit down and like compare those that have been in this space to maybe Agility has been around, I think we talked beforehand. 2018 is when Agility CMS became a formalized product.
Yeah, I mean, it's been available since 2005 as a product, but in terms of a company that only does that product, that's when Agility we kind of switch gears. We no longer build websites as part of like in-house. We just use partners. And so we really started building our developer community around 2018, and really sort of doubled down on Jamstack as well. So we've been that's when we kind of shifted gears away from .NET towards, we still do .NET, and lots of our customers are on .NET, love the platform, and it's amazing. And I think really this year we've seen Jamstack super really take off. The last kind of 6 months has been crazy. Whereas people recognize, all the different headless players, and they're saying, okay, I have this other sort of traditional player and I'm moving off, and I want to, evaluate you guys now. So, and pretty much all of the headless CMSs, like they all provide your content over an API. That's that's the key, right? It's how they do that is where the differentiation is. And it's honestly, for the developers, way better experience across the board for everybody. The difference from Agility is that we provide two things that are sort of unique. One is you can actually define pages in Agility, which is weird because it's just a content API. But just imagine, so you normally have like a list of content, like a blog posts, right? That's a flat list. But when you have pages that you're going to route to, that's a nested list, right? So you can have like lists of sitemaps and different sitemaps in Agility. And then on there, you can actually add components onto those, which are just like the props that you would, if you think of like a React component, in Agility, you're just defining the props that are going to be sent to that component. We call it a module. So you can set up pages of modules, and it's kind of like giving your editors like Lego blocks to play with. And they can just build the website and build the page tree and do all that. And I don't know if there's any other headless CMS that does it. Certainly no one does it quite the same way. And then, look, you got your own account. You must have signed up for a free account.
Sounds a lot like MDX, how MDX has like the components that you can build.
Yeah. So, and the interesting thing with MDX, so MDX is basically stored in Git, right? So those are like actual files. So Agility provides an API layer version of that. And what's really useful is we also have sort of the number two sort of value added benefit is something called content sync. So when you run your Next.js site, you know how whenever you do, like every time you sort of check into Next.js to your Git, it just builds your Next.js site, right? Anytime you change your content in Agility, it does what's like kind of like I say Gwim, the founder of Vercel, he's like, it's cool. It's kind of like CMS pull. We do like a little pull, which pulls all your content into your build and just pulls the delta. So it's really fast to do like Gatsby or Next.js, those builds, because it doesn't have to pull all the content for your site to build it. And then whatever incremental generation that's built into those frameworks takes over. So it's like if I've just updated, a couple things on my page, it can just pull down what it needs to do and then update the build in there using a content sync. And it does that for both preview and live mode. So when you're previewing like a Next.js site, you don't have to do multiple deployments or anything like that. It just I just love Next.js because of that. Because from our point of view, like we want the developers to be happy, but we want the marketers, the editors to be able to have a good experience too. Because right now, like for most CMSs, they actually have a better experience in WordPress. They're like, well, I just want to stay on WordPress. It's easier. I click save and it's automatically there. That's the perfect experience. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons people are sort of looking at other platforms, right? Where traditional CMS is like, okay, at a certain point, it starts to fall down. We want to basically give the same kind of experience to make those people happy, because they're kind of getting the shoddy end of the stick sometimes with some headless CMS, and it's not necessarily the product's fault. It's more about how it got built.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk a minute just on kind of that experience as a whole. So if we take and like if we're in WordPress, right? You often are either in like the blocks side of it, or you're in the classic editor, right?
Yeah.
And as a marketer, that is still, from what I've seen and experienced over my 10 years in this industry, that is crazy to like take in that mental shift of I need a hero image and I need this content, and like you go through all of that and then you finally like, okay, now I need to click preview and see what shows up, right? Is that kind of similar experience, or is there a way that Agility kind of helps kind of get around that, so you still have like the Next.js site up in preview mode and then like Agility over here? Is that kind of how people are managing that today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so when you talk about like the Gutenberg editor where you kind of have blocks, those in Agility are basically modules. And the classic editor is like the massive rich text module, which we actually ship. It's like, yeah, you can just drop a piece of rich text on there and it can do everything in terms of that. And then obviously people tend to have like two sides of it open at the same time. It's like you'll have your preview window and that's built in. And what's kind of nice is you can actually define, you don't need a plugin or anything to tell Agility where your site is deployed for preview or production, so that you actually have the preview link all hooked up there.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking I had this set up. I was going to show, okay, maybe I do. All right, cool.
Yeah, so you've got the Next.js starter. So this is basically what we did is we put together a starter with Next.js. I think it's on Next.js 10. And you've probably got this hooked up in Vercel. I can't quite read your URL there, but it looks like it is. So it's pretty cool because the exact same deployment works in preview and sort of production mode. So you can make changes. And what's interesting too about the way Vercel has done this with Next.js is you don't even need to actually push changes to Vercel to do this. It uses a serverless function to do like that CMS pull. So as you make changes to this content, which can be defined by anybody, right? So the developer would go in and say, hey, what fields do I want to have on my blog post? And you set that up. This is awesome for me to see you do this, because this is so cool. So you can go in here, do that, you save it, and you say whatever fields that you want to be available, those become props to your components that you can use. And then now you do have to refresh your site, and it takes a couple seconds. And then it's all just there. And then when you're okay with that, you just publish it, and it's the exact same URL. So you just go to the top and say, hey, exit preview mode. I like Next.js. This is one of the reasons why I love Next.js so much. and even recommend it almost more than Gatsby, although usually people have decided when they come to us whether they want to do Gatsby or Next.js.
Yeah.
They both have great experiences. In Gatsby, you have to have the Gatsby cloud for preview, but it automatically updates, so that's kind of rad. Whereas Next.js, you do have to refresh. But I just think it's just so flexible, and it's so easy to take your content structures that you define in Agility. So you build that content model and put whatever fields in there you want, as opposed to having like a WordPress, you get that one big rich text editor, which is amazing as a marketer. It's like, hey, complete creative freedom. And from a developer, it's like, oh my gosh, they have complete creative freedom, right? I don't know what they're going to do in terms of like structure of that content. And so for a lot of our customers, they don't actually have, a lot of experience with HTML or with even deciding what structures they want. So what happens is people will build pretty complex models that are highly templated and then just pass those through to all their components that they set up.
Now,
So it's
you were
pretty cool.
talking about Next and Gatsby. Is it just React world that we're living in, or are we able to pull it into like Vue or Svelte or Angular or any other framework
Yeah.
out there?
Well, I'll say this, it's an API-driven world that we're living in, and all those frameworks are just the thing of the day. And I would say React is probably one of the biggest things of the day, even more so because of the popularity of Next and Gatsby, because they've just kind of taken off. People know them. I'm getting enterprise customers coming to me saying, we have to build a next site using this technology. And now we're asking all the other questions, which kind of a year and a half ago, that wasn't a thing. They were still like, it has to be on PHP or it has to be .NET or whatever. So that's pretty cool. But at the same time, other frameworks are super exciting, and of course, you can just consume the API and build your site with Eleventy, which I love. It's amazing, great product, super simple. Or Svelte, which is also cool. I actually, when Sapper first came out, which is like the static site generator for Svelte, I immediately jumped on there and created an Agility site with it. So pretty cool. Nuxt is another one on top of Vue. Looking at those now, I actually just was working last weekend on our Nuxt. So we have a Nuxt, same thing that you're working on there with Next.js, you can do with Nuxt with Agility. So you can pull that content in anywhere because it's literally just JSON, right? You do whatever you want with it. But I find that they're about 12 to 18 months behind where Next was last year. You know what I mean? I think that the innovation from Next.js and Gatsby open source communities and those teams is just out of sight. It's kind of
driving the community right now. Yeah. I mean, they're at the lead of the pack.
Yeah. And what's really cool is like, they're super friendly people. They're really great to work with. I've had conversations with CEOs from both companies, and they're just really great human beings. And I think that's, to me, Jamstack is as much about that community as it is the technology. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. We've had the pleasure of having the CEO of Vercel on. So I always want to say Next. I have to like separate that product in my mind. So I'm curious. You have an article that I was reading through, and I wonder if you could talk about it a little bit. So the title of it is DXP versus Headless CMS.
Oh yeah,
Headless CMS is now the foundation of modern DXP. Can you break down some like acronyms, what DXP is, and just talk about that article?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a video to accompany that because I've had a lot of questions on that. I was writing this, I'm thinking, this is going to be a lot of questions. I need to answer these as a companion. DXP is a digital experience platform. So it's kind of the alternate version. Like it's like if there were multiple dimensions and someone said, okay, Headless CMS is one thing where it's just going to solve the content problem. Someone building a DXP platform says, we're going to solve every single problem and put it in one. We're going to take vendor lock-in and we're going to like build the lock stronger because we're going to have everything in there. And typically that tends to be more of an enterprise type thing, right? Because a company doesn't want to go through procurement on so many different vendors, even though I think that over the years, companies have taken on a lot of vendors, but it's like, hey, I'm going to use, and so like Adobe is a good example of this, Adobe Experience Platform, right? They don't even say they're a CMS, they're an experience platform, and you have to use all of Adobe's tools to get the full benefit kind of thing. And it's pretty expensive, but it solves a lot of problems for you, right? It does a lot of things if you can ever get it installed fully or whatever, right? And I don't know if anybody uses the full picture. Good question. And we have some customers who use Agility as well as Adobe. So a headless CMS is nimble. It can just kind of work in there, and you don't have to do everything with it. You can just do what you need to do.
I have a lot of frustration with Adobe. So like their AEM product and certain things, I've had to implement them in the past, and they're just ripping off open source and rebranding it, and it's super frustrating to me. So it's interesting to hear you talk kind of about that, getting people into this whole immersive like experience, and then you find out, well, it's not really truly like a nice experience to be part of either. Like it's just a bunch of things they've glued together that you're working through. So I think it's almost better to embrace the Jamstack nature of things, because that's how all of these function anyways.
Yeah, let's look at the tools, right? Look at the various tools that actually work the best.
Yeah.
Use those.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this continues to keep coming up, and you actually talk about it in this article. So when you talk about like e-commerce integration, I feel like that's the next step that we're kind of getting into now that people have become comfortable with Jamstack. They're comfortable with all of the different vendors and things like that. E-commerce is that next plateau. I feel like WordPress has a great solution for, because they've had time to build it up. Where do you see that space taking off, especially around agility?
Well, very interestingly enough, Agility actually used to sell. Agility was on its way to becoming a headless DXP. That's kind of what we were doing. But e-commerce is hard. So we actually have an e-commerce platform that we had built that we still have customers using today. And we used the nature of headless e-commerce with Jamstack to basically solve kind of Black Friday type problems for a bunch of customers. And basically that's what we do now when we recommend, headless e-commerce like BigCommerce or Shopify or Snipcart, to say, hey, look, build it on in a sort of the Jamstack methodology. Your site won't go down because you had this, big influx of folks who clicked on your Black Friday email or your whatever sale or promotion that you had. It won't just crash, which is typically what, we've seen from even people who have like a regular Shopify store. If they go viral, some like, hey, buy my makeup and it's huge and everyone's got this thing. And then they go to the Shopify store. Well, if you weren't ramped up and ready for that traffic, then that store could crash for you, right? Like the self-hosted thing. So your Jamstack site is much more resilient to that. So I think it's just a better model. Of course, then you run into the questions of, well, does it take 20 minutes to rebuild your site and all that sort of stuff? To which case I say, that's a full stack kind of a problem. That's not a problem with the framework. It's like, figure out how to cache it, figure out how to do like where we did the CMS pull to sync it all down. We can do the same thing with your API driven e-commerce products, right? Hey, pull it down, see what products have changed since last time I did a build, and sort in Redis cache. Like, it gets a little more complicated, but the net effect is like the website that you actually create is a way better user experience, because the developers it's basically just data you can work with now. And then it's like the checkout experience. You can offload that to the provider or rebuild it yourself. Or if you're using something like Stripe can take care of it for you.
Yeah, it's nice to like offload a lot of that for developers too, so you can understand that they're being securely done. So Stripe is like a massive company, right?
Oh yeah.
They have a ton of developers, a ton of QA, and you don't have to worry about it. Like, they provide a nice little API you can call out to, and now they're doing almost their whole hosted experience over there too, that you can kind of rebrand. So where do you see that kind of tying in Agility's future? Is that kind of the same way? Like, you guys are just 100% focused on the CMS portion of this, and the e-commerce side, like, you'll probably partner with a Snipcart or something like that to build out a product example and go from there?
Yeah, I spent a lot of my time making reference as a developer. I don't build websites. I build reference websites for folks to start from scratch. So I've done, there's a BigCommerce one, there's a Shopify example. And the biggest thing is, how do we pull those products into the CMS so that people can promote them better, which is the real reason to have, you want to maintain your branding across your website with your products. But so if I have, like you talked about, I want to do the hero image and pick the product that's going to link out to there. So in the CMS, to have an integration with Shopify or BigCommerce or whatever. And what we've been doing is taking examples, like if the Next Commerce example, which you may have seen, took that and created it. So in Agility now, there's the same example, which is great, because when you deploy it, the deploy experience, you choose your Agility account, you also choose your BigCommerce account, and it just creates that for you. But then it provides the integration inside Agility to say, hey, what is my page structure going to be? And how do I move things around in terms of content? It gives that control to the editors and makes it so as a developer, I just write the code once and my editor just takes care of all that stuff after. The marketers have more power.
So that's actually a really good good segue into our next question too, because as I jumped into the Agility product, just kind of poking around, checking out CMS, I'm like, is this a better setup for your marketing team to go into first before you even like sit down with design and developers to start kind of carving out the site, because they can load it with product and what are marketers? Copy. They can put copy in there like all they want to, right? Is that the approach you see individuals using with Agility today, or is it still developers getting in first?
Well, it depends on the organization and it depends on the plan. Oftentimes folks will come to us, they already have a design. They're like, hey, we want to rebuild a website and it's going to look like this. And this is what all the copy is going to be. And can that go into Agility? So they've taken what I call a design first approach, which like 90% of people kind of do, because we think in pictures and boxes and whatnot. We ask people to say, okay, awesome design. Now let's leave that and know that that's there and take a content first approach and sort of designing for the future. Because what we want is to be able to have someone where you can rebuild your website as many times as you want, change the design, but there's certain like copy and content that doesn't change. We've had some customers like been around like Cineplex here in Canada. They've been on the same pretty much the same content model since 2007. So they came to us and we actually built their website because we were building websites then. But now that same content is on their apps. It's on smart TVs. And because they took the time to say, okay, we want to do this right, they were coming from like classic ASP at the time, and it was pretty horrible. But the same kind of problems is what they had. And now they're rebuilding everything and they're using Jamstack, combinations of .NET and Jamstack. And it's like the technology doesn't matter. It's just an API. You can do whatever you want. But they really cared about the content, right? And I'm passionate about that because I would love it if I could say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about where it's going to go yet. What content is important to your organization and have that conversation. But people do need to see the design. And I think it's important to sort of like, I'm glad that you brought that up because I see that struggle with like folks who are trying to say, but I want it to look like this. What will it look like? And they'll tailor it to a very specific design, but that's not very reusable.
Yeah. It's kind of tough because as developers, and I work with designers and developers all day long, but we often forget about the people who have to run this site day in, day out and that experience. So I think Sanity has a nice solution for that because you can customize it for each group, but they're kind of banking on the fact like you're going to use their I can't remember the name of it right now, but they're kind of solution for the UI side of their backend as well, where Agility has kind of taken the approach that we'll create the backend for you. Do you find that customers are running into issues with that where, and maybe you can talk about, is Agility extensible in ways that you can kind of create different models and make that fit that as well?
Yeah, and that's where there's, I think, a little bit of a learning curve because there's a model and then there's the actual content, and you can set up and create and reuse the models within Agility as many times as you want. So once you decide that you have, hey, this is the structure of like a piece of content for us. So yeah, you're here, you're on the post model. Yep. Oh, you could have switched back to it, but whatever, it doesn't matter.
Sorry.
Oh, you're jumping all over the place. It's okay.
Hang on.
Okay, so you're on the post model, which is like a blog post. But if you click on the far right, you see that button that says edit for content model. Right there, the purple button beside the word post. Yeah, right there. Okay. So you can actually, because you have the developer role, you're actually editing the content, which is kind of like the database schema, although it's not a database. It's like the schema for this content. It's so that you set up the model. Now I could create 1,000 different lists of posts that have the same model, but they could be for different lists. And if you imagine you had the same blog for like a decade, and I don't want to, if I have like 500,000 articles, maybe I don't want to have a list of 500,000. Maybe I want to split it up and say, this is this year's post list. So I can kind of not have to work in that many. So we've had customers do that where they're like, hey, this is like post 2017, 2018, and they have a different list, but it's the same model. And that's one example of how you can reuse it. The other example where it gets reused is you think of like the module side of things. Like how often do you reuse components that have the same props. But say I have like, I don't know, like an image gallery or an image slider of some kind or whatever, like a hero image. I could create the model for that and then allow my developers to draw, or my editors, I should say, to drop that on whatever page, wherever they want that to go, and put whatever content on there with that specific framework, that'll be used in a component. So it takes the same power that developers enjoy and gives it to a marketer. That's how I see it. But yes, it's flexible, and it usually ends up with us, especially with our enterprise customers. We'll do some consulting services to help them get it set up the first time.
Is that model just like a schema then?
Yeah, I wanted to use, like, naming things is hard, right?
Yeah.
It has been called content definitions. It's been called schemas. We settled on model, mostly because we just look at, because we do user experience, like interviews with people who've never seen it before. And they say the same kind of thing. Well, what is that? What does that mean? What do you mean by schema or content definition? And they seems to be model. I don't know. Seems to click with them a little bit. We're hoping, but that's the terminology. Like what is headless CMS? People have a hard time with. So terminology is tough to get right.
Yeah, I think they say developers spend 80% of their time coming up with names. So
and the rest of the time trying to clear cache.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you talked a little bit about kind of how we can use the APIs and different things like that. I do want to talk again. We briefly kind of went over it, but I want to bring this screen up too. So this is your asset screen as well. Yep. I want to talk a minute. So we kind of spoke about Cloudinary. How does the solution work for the Agility CMS and like images? If I were to use one, is it still allowing things like Cloudinary has? So I can bring up a WebP version of it, a different size. What does that look like going forward?
Yeah, so very similar to so Cloudinary has like a really crazy API for managing images, and like that's just awesome, and they do a great job of that. We do fewer things that's a lot simpler. So essentially, you upload, say, a big old JPEG that's like 2,000 by 4,000 in size, straight from your camera. You can then very easily, so that's delivered over the CDN, but it doesn't make it faster on because it's 5 megabyte file. So you can just use query strings to like $W equals 500. Now it will resize that and scale that for you. And I think the default quality of the JPEG is like 60. So that's what most 90% of people, they just use that to do, and they'll use like the picture tag and make a bunch of sort of responsive image sizes for the different images. And that's probably the easiest way to do it. So that's all delivered through there, and those images are delivered through Fastly. So
I think some of the stuff that kind of came out in Gatsby and Next.js has this now too. The image component that kind of comes into play there. Are they still like working with vendors like you? So like they have a Cloudinary and Imagix and stuff like that. I know you can write your own loader, your own custom loader in those too. Is that something that you see a lot of people having to do when they use Agility in these products?
Yeah, this is kind of like becomes an existential conversation. So those image components, both the Next and the Gatsby image component, 11t has one as well. What they try to do is download the image and then pull it into the site and then manipulate it down there and store like a whole bunch of versions of it in the different formats that it thinks is good. My point of view is, well, I don't want to take up time in my build doing that, because all I need to do is manage the query strings, and that's the same thing. So I've built, I think every developer has built like their own like image component that does that. And so we're actually working with the Next.js and the Gatsby team to adapt those image components so they don't have to download the images and all that sort of stuff. Now, as I say, it's kind of an existential conversation, because there's some people that say, well, it's an atomic build. This is the version of my site at this time. It should have the images too. So if you want to do that, if you believe that, then that's fine. You can use like Gatsby image or Next image, and it will just work and pull it all down. But the build is a lot heavier and a lot bigger, has all that image data, which you don't have to put in there. So that's like, you really hit the nail on the head with that question, because that it does come up quite a bit, and those components are amazing. But I'd like to adapt them so they don't have to download the images.
How does it decide what to serve up to the client?
So there's basically hooks built into those to the different components that do that, and so you have to give it a configuration. So there's a couple different providers. I think Cloudinary might have a configuration for that. I'd have to look. I haven't actually looked into it for a little while, and the Gatsby image that was just released today is brand new. But basically, you say what your configuration is, and that will tell the component how to manipulate the image URLs to do what it needs to do, as opposed to downloading it and serving up different. So it's just a matter of what URL gets spit out in all the different dimensions. So,
Okay.
yeah, and it's funny how for a regular user, just like cropping and resizing an image seems like an easy task. It's like way beyond most people's capability. It's like aspect ratio. What do you mean?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I just need it this big. Well, do you want the full version of that big or like a scaled down version? Let's talk.
Yeah.
And then you have what AVIF and WP.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We the Kern, one of our folks here. I don't know what that one was in reference to, but probably because of MVC. I'm not sure on that one. But we got a new Gatsby image plugin is amazing. I couldn't agree more, and I have only viewed it like for 10 minutes, so it seems pretty incredible already. So can't wait for you guys to be able to start using that within Agility, or
totally.
Agility using, vice versa.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very cool. So Agility, as far as a back-end product. So we've talked a lot about kind of consuming the API and things like that, but Joel, you're a developer at heart, I can tell. Is it a lot of .NET Core pieces in the back end of this? Are you like hosted on AWS? Can you talk about any of that? What's that look like?
Yeah, totally. We're hosted on Azure. So I'm a .NET person, at heart. So I switched my first job in tech. I was building Lotus Notes.
Oh, man.
And Lotus, and they had a web server called Lotus Domino that ran Java. So I was a Java C++ person way back in the day, switched to .NET. I've loved .NET and loved that stack. And when Azure came out, we jumped on it immediately. So we've been on Azure since 2009 when it was in beta.
Cool.
And we have multiple regions that we support. So that's a big deal for a lot of customers. Like, hey, it has to be in X and X country. So we have region support for that. So that's cool. There is a lot of .NET in the back end. There is a lot of Node, a lot of different things. There's even like a lot of different database structures and whatever. So it's like all those different things to maintain all the different stuff that we need to do. So combination of things doesn't really make any difference on the front end because we've open sourced all our SDKs. So the API is like an open API. GraphQL is coming. So we're working on GraphQL support. Which is like has divided the developer community like none other.
Yeah.
Some people love the REST, some people love the GraphQL, but so it's REST API right now, and with all the SDKs are open source, so people can go in and make PRs in there and or fork it and do whatever they want.
Very cool. Yeah, it's always a lot to people take the front end as like, oh, this is a simple app, and then you realize all the things it's doing, and it's always good to hear from the people that wrote it, like what exactly is left in that back end there. So
yeah,
very cool. So one of the big things, I think we've brought it up once or twice, that we always talk about content, and when we talk about content, Brittany and I chose to use MDX because we expect all of our authors basically are going to be developers, and that makes sense
Right.
for us because we write in it all day long. Was there any thought going into it? Like, I know you have the different modules and kind of the textual pieces in there of what that content might look like. Is it a full page, WYSIWYG versus the modular pieces? Can you speak to why you chose the way you did?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the ultimate guide for us was flexibility. It needs to work for whatever content editing team is in place at that moment, and what is their sort of workflow? How do they do stuff? Do they pass around Word docs and say, "Hey, copy this and paste this into something like that," or whatever? Which some people do. So, and some teams are like, "You cannot put a WYSIWYG editor in front of our team. They will copy and paste, nasty things in there, and it will like in terms of like we don't know what's going to be there, right? We need crazy validation and stuff. So highly templated content is useful, but it's being able to make the decision to say, okay, this is the kind of thing that I'm building. This is where it needs to go, and whatever. I find that when people are developing for apps, so if their content is ever going to go to an app that's not a website, that usually helps them decide, okay, We can't just put raw HTML over there. What's that going to look like on a smart TV or an app or on a phone? You can't decide. You can't even parse it out easily to say this is an excerpt of it to go on a list. So that helps people to say, oh, okay, I actually need to have different fields that are going to make up this content. And then the wheels start turning for, oh, this is what a content structure might like. It's going to have different data types. But with that being said, lots of folks just put Markdown on there too. So it's like if funnily enough, like we have a Hugo template like that we use, where really the agility content just gets squirted out into Markdown files. So it's all just content. And this is a great conversation to have with folks, because everyone brings to it like their impression of what it needs to be. And then, we kind of go from there.
That's nice that you have options for everyone though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really challenging at first for me on the Sanity landscape to understand Grok and their kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They use a different system for storing their content, and it basically breaks down almost like a JSON LD example. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always very curious and very it's not a matter of fact thing. Like you just assume, hey, there's words and that's easy to store, but there's so much more than that has to surround that conversation of how you're storing it. So it's good to hear how you guys are doing that. On that kind of same note, I believe you wrote this article too. Maybe James did. No, I think it's you. Why you as a developer should be using a CMS. So this is something that we also grapple with, right? So I wrote our entire LMS backend for Coding Cat, and it uses Firebase. But I often sit there and go, should I have done this? Like, is the data modeling and stuff like that worth it, and the security and things? So why would we rather use like a CMS instead of like Firebase is one example, but like Amplify has DynamoDB, and like we could go on and on and on. Why not just a database?
Well, if it's just for you, and if it's only ever going to be for developers, it could just be that. But as soon as you want to make money from a website and hand it off to someone else, you really need to look at a CMS from there. And I think what's great is all of these products have like free to try. And some of them are even free to use like kind of forever, as long as it stays above a certain level. So you can try it out and make mistakes and go, oh, geez, I put all my posts are in, in some other database. They're all in a FaunaDB, or they're in Dynamo or whatever. You can easily move them in using all these. It's an API driven world. We can move them in and use them there, or leave stuff over here where it was for a while. And it's like, oh yeah, I should have put some other stuff in a CMS and kind of evolve. We're seeing a ton of folks do that now, to come from, hey, they have a website that they don't want to completely rebuild, that they've made some choices where it's like things are in weird places. Some of it's WordPress, and they're moving over to a CMS, or evaluating how that will work, and using like a free platform to get going, and then just kind of moving up the chain as they get more content, more users, SSO, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a good thing to keep in mind for us too, because I stressed about it for so long. We always have the opportunity to jump over to one, so that's great. We have one last question in here, and it's a little bit of a leading question, I think. Do you have any interesting workshops coming from Agility CMS in the future?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Actually, if you go to GatsbyConf, I'm speaking at GatsbyConf at 6 p.m. I don't know what time zone. I think it's 6 p.m. Eastern. So I have a small session there, but also I'm working closely with the Vercel team, and we're doing so they ran their own conference, Next.js Conf, last November, and then they open sourced the conference platform that they used, that they built. And then they asked a bunch of CMS vendors to sort of work with them. And we basically built the CMS content for that conference. So you can, and anybody can just basically go and run that conference. And we're going to take, Lee Robinson and I are going to go through that.
Very cool.
Up soon. So that's really, yeah. So you can just go on the agilitycms.com website and check that out.
That's awesome. Well, cool. I think that probably wraps up the majority of our questions. I really appreciate your time walking through Agility CMS. I know in another month-ish, we have another convo coming up on greater things than just Agility. So I'm excited for that one too. Look forward to checking out your chat. So at this time, we'll do a fun part of our show that we call Perfect Picks. And Joel, you are up first. And I think if I do this correctly, your first pick is the MacBook Pro M1, right?
Loving it. It is. It has changed how I use my computer. It's more like how you pick up your phone. You don't worry if it's going to be fast or anything. It's the same thing using a MacBook M1. And as a developer, I highly recommend giving one a shot. Really love it. It's great for like Node is just flies on it.
I know we've perfect picked this one in the past because of my Mini, but man, I've been loving it. Same. I think I've had it for 4 or 5 months now. It's the best $900 I've ever spent in my life.
Yeah.
Are there
I
any
run Windows 10 in Parallels too.
Are there any programs that aren't working with it still? I heard that was an issue.
My biggest one is Google Drive, and I think that's the name of it now. It used to be called like Stream. They're rebranding it as they release it. So nothing else though. All the Adobe products, Premiere Pro, everything's working for me. So Stream Deck. But that's more of a hardware thing. So cool. And your second pick, which is cool. What is this thing? Tell me about it.
Oh, what a great show. So first of all, I grew up on a farm in rural Ontario. So to me, looking up at space was like, I still believe like space is the thing that brings us all together, even though it's so far away. Mm-hmm. But what For All Mankind does, it's on, I think it's on Apple TV Plus or whatever. Mm-hmm. It reimagines that like the Americans weren't the first to reach the moon. And it changed the course of history. And it follows that course of like slightly alternate history where the space race doesn't stop. So season 1 is fabulous, and like there's a whole show on like getting we need to have a female astronaut on the moon, like the president decides, and so they have a whole show that's based on that one, an episode. It's just fabulous, just a great show, great acting, great writing.
You know what? Now that you've described it, I did watch the first season, and it was amazing.
Fabulous show.
Cool. I know Brittany's got to run, so I'm trying to rush through here. Let's see. This is your perfect pick, correct? I don't have it on the screen.
I'm like, I don't see it.
No idea at all.
Well, yes, that is one of my perfect picks. So I was looking for ways to get started with Agility CMS, and I found this blog post, and I'm not sure who did it, but it sounded a lot like the e-commerce one that you guys did. So it looks great, and it's with Next.js, getting started with Agility CMS in Next.js with an e-commerce app, and it's all there.
Awesome.
It's really cool.
And your second pick?
My second pick is Too Good Yogurt, which is random, but it's really good Greek yogurt. And I try to stay keto, especially during the week where I keep my carbs down. And it has 2 grams of sugar and only 80 calories in each one of them. So they're delicious.
Very cool.
Like it.
So I believe those are your 2 picks. If you have to bail, I completely understand.
I'm good for a few minutes.
Okay. So yes, here's Agility. I can't use that as my pick. That's too easy, but go check out Agility. I think it's awesome, and check out Starters. I'm going to use this as my pick because I was really lazy and didn't get a pick in today. So go check these starters out. It's really simple to get started with Agility. The second thing I'm going to do, because it was announced today, Gatsby version 3.0. Check this out. NPM install it. I am going to throw up We the Kern has a confirmation. It is 6 p.m. for Architecting Full Stack Solutions Jamstack World. Man, did you come up with that title? That is awesome.
Yeah, that's actually it's kind of like I did it from the next point of view at a previous conference, and then I adjusted it for Gatsby for this one. Really looking forward to it and seeing how folks react to it.
Very cool. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on, Joel. I know we have another talk in about a month coming up, and I'm already excited for that one. I'm excited to see where Agility CMS continues to grow in the coming years.
This has been great talking to you guys. Really, really fun coming on your show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
All right. Take care, guys.